right, so let's go right into Howard Schultz, and then we'll go to Joe Biden. Despite growing criticism from Democrats, former Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz is not backing down from a potential 2020 independent run. Schultz announced on Sunday that he will be making a formal decision about a presidential bid in the next 3 months. Numerous Democrats have since warned that an independent bid for the White House by Schultz would re-elect President Trump. Here's how Schultz responded to his critics.
If I run for president, I will run as an American under one banner, the American flag. The question I think we all should be asking ourselves is, at a time in America when there's so much evidence that our political system is broken, that both parties at the extreme are not representing the silent majority of the American people, isn't there a better way, a better choice? If there is a choice between President Trump and a progressive, liberal-minded person on the Democratic side, it would kill me to see President Trump be reelected. And I believe that's what would take place.
Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who has toyed with an independent bid in the past and is now considering a Democratic run, released a statement yesterday warning of the consequences an independent might have in 2020. He writes there's a quote, great likelihood is that an independent would just split the anti-Trump vote and end up re-electing the president. That's a risk I refused to run in 2016, and we can't afford to run it now. And here's that moment from the New York book event that Willie mentioned. Take a look.
I wanted to clarify the word independent, which I view merely as a designation on the ballot.
Don't help elect Trump, you egotistical billionaire.
Yeah,
oh,
why would his publisher do that?
Well, first of all, let me just say.
And he's got this top-notch PR team. Can I tell you, you go there to do a book event, you will get yelled at. Listen, I hope he was told that, because that's pretty basic.
I will say, we've done about 4 or 5 events
every time
at Union Square, and it's my favorite place to go.
Because they yell at you.
It's my favorite place to go, because there's always one in the crowd.
Oh,
and
more.
But they're like really impassioned.
Yeah.
And you'll have people shouting from the crowd, which is cool if you're us.
Yep.
And there aren't cameras on you, and nobody's going to write about it the next day. Well, but that ain't where you want to launch your presidential.
It's not the first time that Howard Schultz is going to hear that either. No, I mean, that's just in the water out there, and he should be prepared for it.
But they're especially.
That's the grassroots speaking.
Well,
but here's the irony to me, and I understand everyone's objections in the Democratic Party, but everyone talks about how the two-party system is broken, there's got to be a better way. And his answer is, okay, I'm going to try this way. And he's been immediately shouted down by every progressive across the spectrum. I understand why they're upset. The stakes are too high. You can't let Donald Trump win again. But they won't even listen to the guy. I mean, it was before he even announced his candidacy that he's being basically vaporized by progressives.
And I do agree. Gene Robinson, I certainly agree that if you just look at the numbers right now, it makes no sense. And Howard Schultz risks the re-election of Donald Trump becoming president again with 45% of the vote. That completely makes sense, but we're like 18 months out. I mean, shouldn't we give the guy a listen? I mean, your piece is on this today in the Post.
Yeah, my piece is on this today in the Post. It does worry me a little bit that I'm with the conventional wisdom on this, strongly with the conventional wisdom that he risks re-electing Trump, and the conventional wisdom has been always wrong recently. However, I'm sticking with this. I mean, there's only one way I can kind of see this, and I don't think he doesn't have the kind of message either that I think it has any danger of catching fire in this country. Number one, he doesn't have.
Gene, that's a problem. Get into that, if you will, because that is the problem. Like, you know,
if he
I've loved No Labels, and I've loved all of these let's come together and hug each other groups. I have
exactly,
but they've never had. It's always been, let's meet somewhere in the mushy middle, and you're okay and I'm okay. There's a reason why Itchy and Scratchy never got along in The Simpsons, because the kids stopped watching and they went outside and played. Why can't somebody run as an independent that has a strong, powerful message that will literally scare the hell out of vested interest in Washington and on Wall Street.
Exactly. You know, an independent with a strong, fiery populist message. You know, who's the independent candidate who's done best in our lifetimes? Probably Ross Perot. He had an idiosyncratic, you know, his own message. It wasn't like anybody else's. Howard Schultz just saying, we'll take a little bit from over here and a little bit from over there. This is not a sort of hug me moment in American politics, and you know, everybody says, yeah, the two-party system is broken, but the two-party system right now is the vessel for polarization, for very strongly held views on both sides, and for groups of people who are not at all interested in meeting in the middle, because their sense is that you meet in the middle, you don't get anywhere. You just so there's a question about what direction the country goes in, but it wants to go in a direction. But here's it doesn't want. I don't think it wants Howard Schultz.
Yeah, here's Howard Schultz's problem. It seems to me, Mike, right now with his message. Howard Schultz speaks like the person he is, the political animal that he is, and that is a very wealthy Democratic CEO. I've heard Howard Schultz's complaint about the left wing of the Democratic Party now for about 4, 5, 6 years. They're moving too far left. They're going to chase off the party. You know, people that are scared of Elizabeth Warren, people that are scared of, you know, the Bob Rubin wing of the Democratic Party. Yeah. So when Howard Schultz runs that way, then he'll peel out off some Democrats and some conservative Democrats, but this is what Bloomberg's talking about. He's not going to light the prairies on fire with this message and pull from both sides.
Well, and that's the point, is it not? If we replayed the Schultz announcement that we just showed here, what's in it? Nothing's in it. It's mush. It's basically, you know, nothing's working. I'm going to run. I'm going to make it work. Look at, he's a nice guy. He's a rich guy. I'm sure he has some considerable thoughts that are relevant to what's going on today. But with that message, it ain't going to happen to him. He's not going to affect the presidential election because he's not going to be there in the end.
Well, President Trump is apparently excited that Howard Schultz is getting in. Maggie Haberman at the New York Times reported that at a fundraiser at the Trump Hotel last night, he told the audience there how excited he was that Howard Schultz might get in explicitly because it would help him get reelected. He shared his thoughts about Schultz's potential candidacy also on Twitter, writing that Schultz, quote, doesn't have the guts, adding, I agree with him, he's not the smartest person. Besides, America already has that. But a new poll says the public disagrees with that assessment. The NBC News Wall Street Journal poll found only 32% rate President Trump as being knowledgeable and experienced enough to handle the presidency.
Which leads, again, without a dash of sarcasm on my part, to the question, who the hell are those 32%?
Same 32% who've rode with him the whole time.
Who are the 32% that think he's smart and knowledgeable enough to be president of the United States?
You know, one of the interesting things going on, Joe, I would submit, is that first of all, I don't know, 80, 90% of the country, they're not on Twitter. They're not looking at Twitter each and every day. But what they are aware of, especially given the events of the last 2 weeks, is that the President of the United States, pure and simple, is incompetent. He can't do the job.
And by the way, even his supporters, and you are starting to see some people on Twitter saying, listen, just because people say they're supporting Donald Trump doesn't mean they aren't whispering, you know, to me, these are conservative Trumpists talking, that they understand he's not up for the job. I think we're going to start seeing some really serious Republican challenges here.
Well, yeah, but on the Democratic side, you know, we talk about some of the campaigns or potential campaigns that may or may not have a message.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.